The Academy prided itself on universal constants: pressure, trajectory, discipline, hierarchy. But out here, in the gossamer dark of the outer Kether expanse, constants had footnotes. Kaia Voss arrived with a knock that sounded wrong only in hindsight. 2 kilometers above the Academy spires of Zyrene Station, the docking bay hung suspended like a cathedral for machines. Stars bled through the starglass ceiling in white fissures. For a species that judged worlds by danger ratings, the station itself felt harmless: pristine halls, climate-perfect air, luminance calibrated to avoid retinal strain. Most cadets found it comforting. Kaia found it suspicious for opposite reasons. An administrator drone, lacquered gold and narrow as a spear, coasted toward her. Its rounded chassis bore the sigil of the Varelian Combat Consortium Academy, VCCA, an institution older than most civilizations it tutored. The drone spoke in patient tonal glyphs that translated itself into Terran Standard English the moment it processed her biometrics. Cadet Kaia Voss. Transfer confirmed. Tier 7 Origin, Earth. Welcome to VCCA. Orientation begins immediately. Follow. Kaia slung her canvas duffel over one shoulder. No insignia. No flaunt. Worn cloth, scuffed metal zippers, edges singed from atmospheric dust exposure. The duffel looked like a files of weather personified. The corridor doors irised open for the drone, but for Kaia they stretched wider, as if unsure how much space a new variable required. She stepped into the atrium. Zyrene Station. Cadets across the chamber halted conversations. Their variety made the silence more interesting than uniformity ever could: 4-legged karate with stone pelt chests that flexed like tectonic plates, live Lasari with filament hair reacting to electromagnetic mood shifts, Carrion neurosensitives whose skull plates glimmered under cognitive load, and basalt-towered Varelians with battle-hardened shoulders and ritual scars mapping their rank affirmations. Kaia crossed the room without ceremony and sat on a cold alloy bench. The metal chilled through the fabric of her black Academy-issue pants. The temperature would have bothered anyone else. It left Kaia alert in a way she liked. A Lasari cadet whispered too loudly, meant to be heard, "She looks breakable." A karate next to him snorted a gravel hum. "Looks lie. Files lie louder." Kaia looked up as the drone continued its path. A dozen eyes followed, chemical sense thickening with curiosity. Professional prejudice had a texture here. She could almost diagram it. "Class." The voice came from above. Observation glass separated psychological orientation from the station atrium. On the suspended deck stood Drake Val Archeron, senior combat instructor, posture exact, voice and authority of war and curriculum fused. His presence sank into the atrium like a gravitational suggestion. Not oppressive, simply meant to push the room 1 centimeter back. Cadets. Today's endurance test is routine. This safe room measures neural response to environmental pressure. No motion beyond room allowance. No surrender signs. A Carrion prodigy raised a hand, cranial plates glowing azure. "Instructor, will dread amplification be active?" Drake's gaze slid sideways. "Not today." Kaia exhaled slowly through her nose. The hiss of it was small, but the multi-species auditory acuity made it carry further than she intended. She adjusted, "Inhale softer next time, speak only if value exceeds cost." She stood and approached the railing under the observation deck. "Instructor. Define pressure bounds." Drake arched one brow ridge. "You question a routine module on your first day?" "Survey," she corrected quietly. "Risk survey, to avoid faulty assumptions." A karate near the bench muttered, "Bold. Or suicidal." Drake heard it. The glass ceiling amplified nothing but ego today. "Cadet Voss. The room handles biology by adaptive design. You will withstand what it dictates." Kaia nodded once. She recognized hand-waved overconfidence. She'd seen it in commanders who thought hurricanes respected rank. The drone projected her file openly. Public protocol assumed transparency builds trust. Her file scrolled through glyphs that turned into text. Kaia Voss. Age, 17. Origin planet, Earth, classified Tier 7 Deathworld, rotational storm belts reaching 800 km per hour, mean surface pressure fluctuations up to 14.2 atmospheres. Raised in a collapsed colony zone subject to kinetic atmospheric debris and psychological stress training modules for survival. Specialization interest, combat theory, xenopsychology, adaptive physiology. Cadets read aloud. The atrium translated undertones to threat, fragility, curiosity, dismissal, awe, mockery, infer Kaia, metric mismatch, missing variable, consequence loops. A Lasari veteran cadet, LYSS Tor, class striker, stepped toward her. Your world storms, are they metaphor or physics? Physics, Kaia said. Metaphor is inefficient. LYSS respected boundaries. But today he wanted calibration. So you're trained against terror? Kaia picked her words with microsecond thrift. Trained against loss of function. Fear is background noise. Panic is fatal design. A Varelian deck cadet leaned in. That sounds like defiance. No, Kaia whispered. Just a safety framework. The emergency siren did not scream. Sirens are from mammalian instinct vectors. But that duffel, her duffel, still lightly smoking from docking atmospheric burn, held the only sign the room needed to misread her endurance before any test began. The atrium air composition sensor spiked for one species only, Terran anomaly detected, psychological amplification unnecessary, ego pressure already heavy, observing consensus unstable. The deck glass irised open overhead and Drake prepared to initiate the test officially. Safe room door opens now. Cadet Voss. Enter last. Kaia walked toward the chamber, walls black as pressure depth midnight, interior glyphs already swirling violet, meant to weigh dread like mass syntax. The system had not activated Cascade yet. But the room already sensed failure of perception resonance in the class, subtle cracks spreading through cadet ego field like hairline fractures. Kaia reached the threshold. Softly said over her shoulder, meant perfectly calm. Instructor calibrated this for intimidation. Let's hope the room stays a classroom instrument. Drake smirked, still assuming parameters bend to command. Cadet. Step in. Kaia did. The door sealed behind her with a thock that made every species understand the wrongness of the assumption. The edges glowed, room allowance adaptive slicing gravity to pressure tolerance. Kaia Voss stood still, breathing small and unbothered. Outside, the observation deck shivered. Universal constants should have included footnotes. Today, a new footnote arrived silently, boots aligned, mind unshakable by theater. The room had yet to test minds. But it had already tested everyone's assumptions by letting hers walk in untouched. And the cascade had not even begun. The safe room was never impartial. It only advertised neutrality. Behind sealed alloy, atmospheric compression regulators hummed a bass note that humans would call subaudible, but off-world species felt it as a tactile truth. The chamber was shaped like a perfect geometric hexagon, every vertex etched with psionic stabilizer runes glowing indigo. At default settings, the room created psychological discomfort calibrated individually to each cadet's neurology. Drake's secret setting bypassed that courtesy. Kaia didn't know the exact override. She didn't need to. The room's behavior made motives obvious. The neural pressure began with a metallic whisper, like static sliding across a dead radio, first quiet, then granular, then vast. Cadets reacted in sequence, a cascade that looked less like hierarchy and more like domino physics rewritten by biology. Lasari Cadet Venlo recoiled, filaments in his scalp trembling with overcurrent. It feels like the air has hands, he gasped, dropping to one knee. Across from him, karate striker Brackthon remained standing 2 seconds longer before his stone pelt exoskin hardened reflexively in defense. But psychological pressure ignored armor, the mind was the target. He buckled mid-breath, claws scraping down the obsidian plating. Adaptive design my plated, he snarled, words shorting into a growl, I can't think straight in here. The room wasn't demanding terror, it was mining it. Kaia stayed upright, not by resistance but by difference. The assault didn't hit a human brain like command code. It hit like chaotic weather. And humans were built for pattern extraction from chaos. Narachi, a Carian neurosensitive who had once rewritten her species' meditation heuristics for Warfleet duty, tremored as pressure overloaded her cobalt neural discs. She staggered toward the wall, vision blooming into violet half-math hallucinations. "Human cadet," she whispered, teeth clicking in cognitive distortion, "why aren't you folding?" Kaia turned her head. Minimal motion. "I fold when there's leverage, not spectacle." The discs in Narachi's skull flickered dangerously bright before dimming into protective shutdown. She collapsed slow and almost ceremonial, like a falling statue that knows it's being observed. The room logged failure with clinical indifference. Drake watched from the deck above, not seeing the logs yet, convinced theater was obedience. Kaia finally knelt, but only to check another cadet, not because the room pushed her down. A small, quilled, mammalian Esserix cadet named Pilrek lay on his side, hyperventilating. His species' lungs were 3-chambered, excellent for climbing ammonia cliff spires at 2 gravity, terrible for psionic overpressure. Kaia placed 2 fingers on his flank, counting breath rhythm like vitals telemetry. "Slow. Count by 3s, she said softly. Pilrek wheezed, "Can't breathe, it hurts." Kaia shook her head, efficient sympathy. "Pain spikes oxygen. Oxygen spikes panic. That makes feedback worse. Rule the cycle." The other cadets, semi-conscious, overheard the exchange. Each species parsed the dialogue differently. To Varelians, brevity signaled danger. To Lissari, it signaled reversal potential. To Kaia, it signaled triage protocol. The room surged louder. The bass note turned tidal. Gravity manipulators flexed slightly, adjusting posture allowance to avoid cadets snapping spinal load limits by accident. The walls rippled under increasing psionic density as the chamber locked onto observational ego mass influence. Kaia stood again. Observation deck consoles groaned audibly. Its stoic command veteran was processing consequence vectors backward for the first time. Kaia finally looked toward the upper angled glass where Drake's outline loomed, blurred slightly by a haze of psionic gravity, but still readable in silhouette. "Instructor," Kaia called, calm not loud, "you can test endurance without courting collapse. But not when the system reads ego as input." Drake frowned. "The VCCA doesn't defer to rumors of colony storms." Kaia's lip twitched. "Not amusement. Recognition of a doomed sentence." "Then you're here to teach a class, not finish one." Another cadet, Brackthon, half groaning off the floor, rumbled, "Instructor, the logs, she isn't lying." Drake snapped back, "Logs don't rewrite physiology." Kaia whispered, almost to herself but carried by the room acoustics, "But they rewrite narrative expectations." The neural surge peaked. Without dramatic warning. The room loved subtlety more than instructors did. Pressure hit observation glass, reflecting inward not outward, amplifying prejudice vectors like mass-loaded gravity. The room didn't break bodies. It broke certainty. Observation deck cadets staggered from feedback exposure. A monitoring AI screamed error glyphs, only in math, audible to Kaia but visible to all as spectral distortion sigils. The chamber's override was not meant for public coherence. It was meant for sanctioned intimidation-compatible species frameworks. This was not one of those species. Kaia stood still. Behind her, species prodigies fell one by one. Her silence was now reframed not as fragility but edge case immunity. The room logged a new variable: human architecture processes chaos, not phobia triggers. The pressure finally subsided, not from dominance, but starvation. The anomaly's neurology offered no fear mass. The room could not amplify what did not exist. So it dissipated influence vectors toward the largest external cognitive contributor. Drake. Kaia exhaled gently, dust motes floating around her boots as the pressure equalized. Pilrek whispered from the floor, exhausted, threading through breath, "If you weren't bracing, what were you doing?" Kaia straightened her jacket quietly. "Collecting data. I came to learn, not be ranked." The chamber powered down around her, vertices dimming, runes shuddering into dormant indigo scorch patterns that looked almost respectful in death of pressure. Consequences had arrived. Drake simply hadn't anticipated the delivery method. The test had ended. The lesson had only just begun. The Varelian Combat Consortium Academy logged neural cascade anomalies with icy professionalism. Alarms silenced. The heavy bass note, once psionic pressure in acoustic form, faded entirely. What remained was the sound of ordinary breath, dozens of cadets sprawled on the obsidian floor, and a human girl who appeared almost bored, but was instead cataloging consequences. Medic drones arrived in triangular formation, white plating reflecting trauma glimmers off the chamber walls. They glided without haste. The Academy expected psychological bends, not systemic ruptures. Their processors chattered in clipped binary tones before translating to organic speech. Cadet Pilrek. Partial respiratory failure. Cognition intact. Stabilizing oxygen mix. Cadet Brackthon. Ego trauma. Body, structurally unbroken. Pride, otherwise. Kaia Voss stood near the center, hands threaded behind her back. She had remained motionless as the room surged around her, letting the pressure vent sideways. Now that silence settled, every species knew her posture had never been surrender. It had been an alternative coordinate system. Drake Vel Archeron entered the chamber minutes later with boots loud on purpose and face unreadable by intent. The observation glass behind him stayed misted from feedback shock loops. He carried no clipboard. Veterans didn't need one to feel when pride had been concussed. Cadets stirred groggily. LYSS Tor, the class striker Lasari, opened his eyes first with a hissed inhale. His irises glimmered like fluorescent nova wires responding to a power surge. "Instructor," he croaked, dry-tongued, "the Cascade was banned for a reason." Drake eyed him. The room overclocked itself under influence vectors. "I only nudged a switch." Brackthon propped himself up. His exoskin shed training dust like planetary shale. "Nudged? You grabbed a reactor throttle and called it psychology." A Varelian cadet muttered reverently, "That wasn't pressure. That was occupation." Drake's scar-mapped jaw worked like stone reconfiguring under sudden cooling. "Cadet Voss," he nodded toward her, "speak plainly. You come from storms, collapsed colonies, T7 grav zones. Why didn't your mind go dark?" Kaia met his eyes with a level look that suggested no challenge, no hierarchy, only vectors misaligned by assumption. Humans learn to parse chaos early. Your cascade is orderly fear amplification. My world storms were not. Pilrek, now sitting upright and breathing through an Esserix oxygen regulator collar, whispered, "She saw this coming." "No," Kaia corrected, "I planned for imperfect input, not illegal output." LYSS Tor leaned on his staff. Filament hair sagging limp with system fatigue. "So you didn't resist. You reframed. You let the room think it had leverage while you watched its math." Kaia shrugged one shoulder. "Reframing is cheaper than revolt." The med drones turned toward her, curious focus lights scanning lumen refractions off her Regulation Academy jacket. They had expected meltdown. They observed adaptation instead. One drone hovered close, voice softer by machine design. Terran neurology shows low feedback to dread loops. High coherence under non-signal interference. A Carrion Council observer, Professor KLRA, a slender, sapphire-rank xenopsych tutor whose species communicated in empathic compression, entered quietly, as if understanding Kaia's cadence better than the veterans did. Her translator prism orb bobbed beside her like a moonlet. Professor KLRA surveyed the chamber with no theatrics. "The room is a near-perfect thought mirror. You feared." She processed. Drake snorted. "She processed what, exactly? Indifference?" Granularity, KLRA corrected. A human reads storms as noise and extracts signal from collapse. She recognized amplification hunger in the chamber. You fed it fear. She fed it data. Brackthon grunted in agreement. And it ate us. Professor KLRA studied Kaia with something between clinical admiration and predatory respect. Cadet Voss, your species experiences dread as neurochemical temporal weather patterns. The safe room waits emotion to test control. But control is not absence. Explain the internal mechanism. Kaia nodded, considering. Each species in the room waited, not for arrogance, but structure. She finally spoke. Earth storms teach you to compress to function, not expand to fear. When the cascade hit, I mapped microfeedback across species. The room reads emotion as fuel. I gave it none. So it turned toward instructor influence, which carried ego mass I didn't generate. You generated it. It consumed you. Pilrek ran a shaky paw through flattened quilled fur. That sounds like power, not schooling. Kaia looked toward the deactivated room vertices now dimmed into indigo scorch lines. Power is physics. Endurance is training. I used one to protect the others. Drake folded arms. Veteran conviction slightly shattered at the edges. You protected your class? Kaia shook her head. I protected your academy. Professor KLRA's translator prism orb glimmered with sudden insight and dread for administrative consequence. You entered human last. But your influence was first. The cascade was never about gravity or neurology. It was about perception, authority over confidence. Humans respond poorly to hierarchies built from invalid premises. Drake stiffened. Ego trauma biting back. The VCCA hierarchy exists for stability. KLRA gestured toward the unconscious cadets. And stability snapped first. Another drone chimed softly, safe room psychological test terminated. Verdict flags updating by species frameworks. Terran anomaly logged, tier reclassification suggested. LYSS Tor blinked toward the observation glass where other upper deck cadets, monitoring through broken pressure consoles, struggled to reboot their own feedback loops. He muttered, for a classroom instrument, it sure behaves like a beast with preferences. Professor KLRA said, rooms aren't beasts. Civilizations are. The rooms just echo their bias curves. A Varelian cadet whispered, she didn't raise her voice once. Brackthon breathed a laugh that hurt pride more than lungs. A raised voice demands respect. A lowered one earns it. Pilrek looked between Kaia and Drake. So what happens next? Kaia picked up her duffel, sliding it over her shoulder once more. The worn zipper edges chimed softly like metal that had survived weather without needing to prove it to alloy walls. Next happens outside the chamber. This was preface. Drake stepped aside. Not chivalric. Merely recognizing when a coordinate of certainty had been unseated. Cadet Voss, Professor KLRA said, the Academy will request storm neurology heuristics from Earth psychology archives for future students. Apparently, Tier 7 origin requires new psychological instruments, not overrides. Kaia nodded once, boots turning toward the open chamber door. New instruments are fine. Just test frameworks, not ego inputs. Drake muttered as she passed, barely audible but everyone heard it anyway. Maybe Tier 7 means minds aren't glass, just unusual pressure engines. Kaia's second day began not in the safe room, but in the data heart of the Academy, the Auric Measurement Annex, a hushed vault where every incident became a metric, and every metric rewrote doctrine. The annex doors opened with soft pneumatics, a polite hiss this time, rooms could learn, it seemed. Inside, monolithic calculation pylons hung from the ceiling like inverted stalactites, each streaming assessment lattices. The ambient air tasted faintly of burnt circuits, the station's equivalent of a whiteboard stained by chalk. Professor KLRA waited before a hovering holotable, hands clasped, posture academical and unthreatened. Her translator orb blinked awake at Kaia's approach. Instructor Vel Archeron's request for Tier 7 reclassification review triggered a quorum. They want your testimony, brief, technical, unofficial, Kaia said. Kaia slid onto a bench that adjusted automatically to human mass tolerance, cushioning with a quiet hum. Review boards love symbolism, Kaia said. Storms don't care for symbolism. Drake entered a moment later, fatigue lines shadowing a face built for wars that didn't include humbling classrooms. His armor was absent, his scars were his resume. Annex protocol updated. No psychological tests for humans until frameworks are revised, he said, tone clipped but honest. Kaia gestured toward the holotable, which bloomed into 12 overlapping species neural charts. The spike from the previous day formed a spectral mountain range that leaned sharply toward external ego input nodes rather than biology innate thresholds. Kaia pointed at one ridge. That's where your pride got quantified. A Carian researcher, slender and silver-robed, looked over the charts with fascination. Psych modules shouldn't spike external contributor feedback. Yet yours hit 0. How? He asked. Kaia finally opened the duffel, a gesture more dramatic than speech for someone who carried storms in place of monologues. She pulled out a flat, slate-black neural recorder. Primitive hardware by station standards, but resilient. Earth systems teach you to mute emotion to maintain function under disaster, not audience. Different input, same pressure, quieter output. The council observers chimed in privately through the translator net. Kaia heard it, the others pretended not to. Different cognitive grammar. Null feedback is a mirror. Danger disguised as composure. The quorum assembled minutes later. Observation decks were redundant in the annex, so they formed a physical crescent this time around a projection dais. Representatives from Lasari Command Laureate Guild, Koroth Dominion Neural Warfleet Tutors, Varelian Imperial Arm of Instruction, and Esserix Xenopsych Mammal Response Division appeared not as individuals but institutions incarnated through proxy observers. Kaia whispered to Kaia, say what is useful. Silence what is theater. Kaia stepped onto the dais. Her boots made a sound this time, small but purposeful. Not a knock. A period mark. Cadet Voss, spoke a Lasari observer, voice rippling slightly electric, state your endurance classification. Not endurance, Kaia said calmly. Mismatch. Instructor error, not pain threshold. Drake winced slightly. A mismatch I initiated, he muttered. A consequence she contained. A Koroth observer leaned forward. His posture towered like a basalt cliff face. The annex suggests your mind didn't trigger dread loops. Explain mechanism in practical terms. Kaia nodded. You design psychology like theatrics. We design comm like infrastructure. If panic feeds the chamber, then absence of panic defeats the cascade by starvation. Same force, different meaning. Professor Kaia interjected gently to the quorum, she null-fed the system. The system fed on your instructor. And then academic doctrine cracked before biology did. Another Esserix observer, breathing slow through a gas exchange collar, asked, Cadet Voss, do you fear regret? Kaia smiled faintly, economical emotion, minimalist expression, devastating for expectations. Regret is a luxury. I came with redundancies. The holotable bloomed alive again, running comparison models between Terran disaster neurology and Carian Cascade architectures. The metrics scrolled visibly on the walls. This time the charts weren't mountains. They were bridges toward consequence written backward into doctrine. Drake finally spoke, voice calmer than the station had originally assumed a Varelian could be under cognitive concussion. The room didn't break because you overpowered it. It broke because you didn't conform to its assumptions. And conforming was the true test, not the cascade. A Carian archivist nodded. Classification updated by consensus. New tier required. The translation orb chimed globally across species frameworks. Varelian Combat Consortium Academy. Tier 7 origin reclassified as Tier 7A, Cognitive Storm Engine Architecture. Psychological modules recalibrated for null feedback tolerance. Kaia stepped down. The doctrine updated behind her like a curtain closing silently, efficient, clinical, respectful in its own cold way. Professor Kaila looked at her after the meeting. You handed them consequence, not rebellion. Kaia nodded. Next time a room tests me, it tests me, not their expectations. Drake Vel Archeron leaned against a measurement column quietly as Kaia departed down the pristine hall, scars humming a gentle neural echo of ego-spectral feedback, now too humbled into protocol to be satire any longer. He said softly to the empty chamber. Some limits require silence to hear the fracture point. Today's fracture point walked in regulation boots.